Okay, we are a couple of minutes past the hour now, so I think we will crack on. First of all, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm sure ECCTA has been on everybody's lips for a number of months now, so we're really pleased that you could join us to have this session this afternoon, ask the questions that maybe you've not been able to get answers to, or maybe you've been worried about asking. But first and foremost, we want it to be a really interactive session. We want everyone to engage. So please feel free all throughout the session to put some questions in the chat. We are happy to pick all of them up. If we can't answer them, we will take them away and come back to you, but we will certainly try and answer as many questions as we possibly can. So probably a great thing to do now would be to introduce you to your team this afternoon. So starting with myself, my name's Dana Wagstaff. I'm the Global Product Lead for Entity Management Solutions here at Vistra. I've been here for 12 years. A lawyer by background and various different roles within the business, including legal. Most recently, prior to my current role, I looked after one of the specialist corporate governance teams within the business, so super close to the COSEC environment. And my role now is very much looking at the services that we offer in terms of corporate governance, whether they're the right services, do we need to digitize them, are we doing the things that our clients need? So super close to the client ask, but also super close to the kind of changing governance landscape. So ECCTA is very close to my heart, as I'm sure you can all appreciate. And I will pass you over to Nicole.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Sperling. I'm a corporate lawyer here at Vistra, working for Vistra Corporate Law, which is the law firm which is part of Vistra. We advise clients on all aspects of corporate law, and I look after ECCTA specifically and compliance, with a particular focus on the legal advisory offering, such as failure to prevent fraud compliance. So I've been a lawyer for 12 years, advising on corporate transactions, M&A, group reorganisations and the like. So good to be here and happy to answer all your questions.
Thanks, Nicole. Suki?
Hi everybody, my name is Suki. I'm the Senior Manager in the Specialist Corporate Governance team here at Vistra. I'm a Chartered Governance professional with over 9 years experience spanning across the FTSE 100, FTSE 250 and global financial institutions industries. I specialise, and we all, I guess, in the team are looking mainly at corporate governance and providing corporate governance technicality advice.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Suki. So from just before we kind of dig into the detail of ECCTA and get stuck into all of the different questions, it's probably helpful for me to give you, those of you that aren't familiar with Vistra, a bit of an overview. So Vistra is a global corporate services provider. We support clients in a wide range of jurisdictions with all sorts of corporate services. So obviously entity management, which is really closest to all of our hearts today in terms of ECCTA and the COSEC landscape, but also tax, payroll, accounting, a whole range of advisory services. So we are a truly global corporate services provider. We have around 10,000 colleagues in over 100 different offices in over 50 jurisdictions across the globe. So we work a lot with multinationals who have multi-service lines in multi-jurisdictions, but equally we also have a core of clients that work in single country with us doing single services. But in terms of ECCTA, what we have tried to do is really position ourselves as knowledge leaders and providing that kind of support and advice to both clients and non-clients alike, which is why we wanted to schedule today's session to make sure that we kind of gave everybody a bit of outreach, because it's very hard to know where to go with these questions, and companies' house are super busy, so it's not always easy to connect with someone and ask the questions that are playing on your mind, really. So as I said at the outset, it would be really great for this session to be super interactive. We will start with a really short overview of kind of where we are now with ECCTA, what we've seen already, what's still to come, and then we'll dive in with some questions. But it would be great, before we talk about ECCTA in general terms, it would be great to have a little bit of a poll and understand from you guys out there in the audience how prepared you feel for ECCTA and kind of what steps you've taken already. So hopefully with the magic of technology, we'll have a poll come up. Wonderful. Just to see what steps you've already taken in terms of getting yourselves ready for ECCTA and what you might have done. So we've got some different options there in the poll for you around getting your IDVs completed. I'm sure we'll talk about that lots in the questions today, but also looking at kind of some of the wider implications, which I actually think is a really important focus for today in terms of making sure that you're ready and making sure that you are going to be compliant. We'll just give a few minutes for the polling to come up through. Okay, so we've got some great results coming in on the poll. As you would probably expect with the timelines that are kind of coming up and the things that are imminent, we've got the highest responses on IDV. So we've got 71% of the audience have got their directors and their PSCs identified. We've got verified IDs online and personal codes received for 43%, which is pretty good. It's above the national average. So well done to everybody on the call. But we've also got some ECCTA audits completed, which is really, really interesting because actually I think that's one of the things that probably is being missed or maybe not being as much of a priority as it could be. So lots of good stuff happening there. I think that's really great. And thank you for taking part in that poll. Really helpful. So in terms of timeline and where we kind of come from, where we've been, some of you may know this, some of you may have some background, some of you may have none. So ECCTA, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, received royal assent in 2023. We saw the first changes coming in 2024, and largely that was increased powers for Companies House as the registrar. And we've already seen a lot of kind of different behavior from them. So historically, you know, if you forgot to file your confirmation statement for maybe 6 months, it would be fine. No one would really care. You just file it late. But we are seeing companies being struck off and receiving strike-off notices for that now. We're also seeing Companies House reach out and question the identity of the PSCs. So those increased powers are very much enforced. They're very much happening. We also had more practical things come in, such as registered email addresses. So registered offices being appropriate, no PO boxes anymore, but also registered email addresses for all registered UK entities, which was a step change for quite a lot of businesses having to have that kind of digital touch point as well with Companies House. Then if we looked at earlier in this year, 2025, back in March, the scheme opened for registration of authorised corporate service providers. So businesses that are registering individuals both for IDV but also filing documents for individuals at Companies House could register as authorised corporate service providers. Those businesses had to be regulated, so predominantly by the Money Laundering Authority. So lots and lots of businesses like Vistra, other corporate service providers, also law firms registering as ACSPs. That opened in March. Lots and lots of uptake there. And then very quickly followed in April by the opening of the voluntary period for ID verification. The idea was to obviously get as many people verified prior to the mandatory date as possible. And there has certainly been an uptake, you know, that it's not that it's not worked at all. I think there's maybe not been as much of an uptake as Companies House would have liked in terms of getting this bulk of the kind of 7 million directors in the UK ID verified, but certainly there has been a good uptake and it's been a good test period, for want of a better expression, to make sure that the systems work and the filings work and people are successfully getting through the IDV process. Obviously, there has been a lot of noise online around the Companies House system, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for the most part, it's working. Personal codes are coming through. People have got their registrations and they're ready to go. We could jump forward to the 18th of November from an IDV perspective. That would be the next date. But actually, there was a really big date in between that has passed now, around 1st of September, and the failure to prevent fraud offence. So a lot less headlines than IDV had from Companies House in terms of compliance, but actually a really important piece of the legislation that people need to be aware of. So for large businesses, impacting large businesses, and really creating a new fraud defense, which actually does quite a lot. And I'm sure some of the questions today will pull this out, because actually it's quite fundamental in terms of how businesses need to look at their landscape and what they need to do to make sure that they're ready and that they can benefit from the statutory defence if they do find themselves in a situation where there is an allegation of fraud. Then fast forwarding to 18th of November, obviously we have mandatory ID verification coming in on the 18th of November. There is a transition period for existing companies, but it's not quite as straightforward as a lot of people are thinking. So one of the big misconceptions in the market at the moment seems to be that I can just wait for my annual confirmation statement to be filed and I can do my personal codes then. That is true for your directors. So directors of existing companies will be filing their IDV or reporting their IDV to Companies House with the first confirmation statement. However, if you have a PSC who is not a director, their filing date is 14 days after the first day of the month that they were born. So a very different date. So it's wrong for companies to kind of rest on their laurels and think that the confirmation statement date is the driver. There's definitely more to it than that. And it's largely because of all of these things that we've just talked about that maybe haven't been as advertised as well as they could have been, that we wanted to have today's session to give you all a chance to ask the questions that maybe you've been embarrassed to ask. As I said earlier, maybe you didn't quite know where to ask. So please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to add any questions you like. I guarantee you there are no silly questions, and I guarantee you if you're thinking it, someone else is thinking it too. So please don't be shy. Please do put questions in, and we'll be happy to answer as many of them as we can in the time that we have today. So I think without further ado, Nicole and Suki, if you're both ready, I think we have got some questions. So we'll dive into a couple of those questions. Let me have a look. Where shall we start? Let's start. This is a good question and quite a nice kind of opener in terms of what we've been talking about, that this is not just a tick box of IDV, it's much broader than that. So Suki, I'm going to come to you first. So with the registrar now being able to query and reject information under the amended section 29, how should governance teams evidence that filings are accurate and validated before submission, particularly where data flows through local or outsourced administrators? Great question from whoever submitted that.
So in relation to this, this is kind of where this governance discipline meets audit thinking. So each filing should be supported with 3 artifacts. So the first one being a source of truth register or an entity master file. The second one being kind of a pre-filing checklist and attestation signed by the responsible manager or director. And number 3, a document pack showing approvals, IDs, and addresses. The aim here is to segregate the preparer, the approver, and the filer, timestamp everything and store it under kind of a unique filing ID or code, so that when the registrar does raise a query, you can trigger a corrective and preventative action and report it straight to the board secretary. So that creates a clear audit trail and it demonstrates control maturity as well. It also then turns filings into governance assurance events rather than just administrative tasks.
That's great. That's a really great answer. Thank you so much. And whoever submitted that question, if you've got any follow-up questions, again, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will try and make sure we get to them. Okay, so next question. So this is an IDV one, so I will pick this up. So we have a question. Can you please let us know if there are any ID verification requirements for individuals that are directors of a corporate director? So this is a great question, and it's a great question. It's one I like because Companies House have flip-flopped a lot through this ECCTA, particularly from an IDV perspective. We have been told from the beginning that corporate directors and also corporate PSCs, so RLEs, will also be required to complete ID verification. When they confirmed the mandatory date of the 18th of November, that obviously was just in relation to individual directors and individual PSCs. I recently attended the Companies House stakeholder conference and this question was asked, what was happening with corporates, what was the timeline? The answer for corporate directors was quite vague, but the reality with corporate directors is that they will have their IDV by virtue of their corporate having to IDV. So until you move into the space of overseas corporate directors, we know that that will happen organically, but at the moment, Companies House are still saying pending, we'll come back to you. So for RLEs, so corporate PSCs, it's very much still envisaged that for all corporates there will be an IDV requirement, but Companies House are currently working on how they balance the interest of Companies House and the registrar and transparency with the burden on the company. It's become apparent to Companies House that they don't need to know, every detail of absolutely everybody. So they're just working out exactly what that looks like, and then they will come back on that. So there will be ID verification for corporates. We don't know what the mandatory deadline will be yet. For corporate directors, the likelihood is if the corporate is a UK corporate, they will have their personal codes through their corporate directorship. So by the time we get some clarity, they will already have been through the process. But the other thing I would also add is if you're concerned, there's nothing to stop you having directors from a corporate director go through IDV now. It doesn't have, you don't have to do it just when it's mandatory. You can get them in place now in readiness. It is going to happen. We just don't know exactly what that timeline looks like yet. Okay, so next question that we have. So my concern is related to IDV of PSCs, where the PSC is a listed company. I understand it will be required to be a director of the PSC, but how will Companies House know who is actually a director of the PSC, as they wouldn't have access to the information? This is kind of covered by exactly what we just talked about. So this is why we haven't had a mandatory date for RLEs. So corporate PSCs. When we talk about RLEs, we're talking about relevant legal entities. So corporate PSCs. Companies House don't know what that looks like, and it's exactly this point that was raised by them as a why they don't know what it looks like. So they have to figure it out. And similarly, where you have a PSC that's a trust or something like that, it's just not very simple. So they are aware that it's an issue, and that's why we haven't had any clarity or any confirmation from Companies House yet in terms of what that looks like. So it will be coming, but as of right now, they don't know what the answer is, which is why it hasn't become mandatory yet for any corporates. But great question though, and definitely something that's topical and we are seeing come up over and over again. Okay, next one. Okay, so this is great. This is a question on failure to prevent fraud, which is really, really interesting. So as I mentioned in the intro, failure to prevent fraud only applies to large companies. So this question is, my group structure is large, and I'm not sure how to accurately identify my PSC, and how do I go about this? So I think that's one for you, Nicole.
Thanks, Dana. So, yeah, great question. So I think this is more about identifying your PSC and making sure you've accurately identified them. So obviously, as we know, the PSC legislation is complex, and there are a lot of entities out there who are able to very much straightforwardly identify their PSCs, but then there are others where there are trusts involved, for example, maybe a PE fund. And actually, it's not that straightforward. So in those situations, the entity that's it's subject to is required to take reasonable steps. That's what the guidance says. And so those reasonable steps would include making all investigations. You would need to question who you think the PSC is by sending notices to them. We would suggest that a legal analysis would help you with this. So if you have any questions, obviously then speak to your law firm, to your lawyers, then they would be able to help you with that. The question relating to failure to prevent fraud and large organizations probably is more around whether there are entities as part of the large structure which are excluded from failure to prevent fraud. So that would mean that because you've got a UK subsidiary, therefore you're excluded. That isn't correct. So if you are a small subsidiary as part of a large group, you haven't got an exclusion, you are still covered and in scope as part of failure to prevent fraud.
That's amazing. Thank you, Nicole. Okay, next question. Okay, actually, we've got a question that's probably a direct follow-on from that one. So, certain parts of ECCTA are applicable to companies of a certain size. Is that on a financial consolidated basis or a standalone entity basis? Again, I think that was one's probably for you, Nicole.
Yeah, so you're right in that there are parts which are based on size. Speaking directly to failure to prevent fraud, that is on a consolidated basis. So those three criteria which apply to large organisations, where two of them need to be met for the failure to prevent fraud offence applies. Then there is, you have to look at the group as a whole. So you don't need to take, for example, one subsidiary where there's only two employees, for example, and 5 million turnover. You need to look at the whole group and make sure that you're using that as the basis to inform your calculations.
That's fab. Thank you. We've got a couple of IDV ones now. One which I think we've largely covered. So, when the PSC is a company, what is the deadline for verifying IDV for the company? So, the deadline for verifying IDV for that RLE, we don't know. So this is what we were just talking about. This is what we just covered. We don't have a deadline yet from Companies House. We don't have an anticipated deadline yet either, particularly in the PSC space. That's very much still pending. So watch this space. Obviously, we will be putting out information on LinkedIn and on our social channels as soon as we know, and I'm sure Companies House will be as well, but we will try and keep all of our connections updated as soon as we get those answers. And then just another one on IDV, which is super topical, because actually we're getting this question a lot as an ACSP, and that is around overseas directors. So the question that I have two questions. One is around overseas directors and their documents not being in English. And then another one around director, it's a very specific one, around a director who is, one of our directors is a US national, but currently resides in Spain on a visa. Can their identity be verified? So in both of these cases, the answer is absolutely yes, their identity can be verified. Companies House are struggling a little bit with overseas directors. Their process, by their own admission, is very, very linear in terms of IDV. So they struggle sometimes to look at the exceptions. However, a lot of the ACSPs, Vistra included, have solutions that are much more geared towards global nationals. So, for example, the Vistra solution, it does not matter what language your documents are in. That's absolutely fine. They can be in whatever your home language is. Similarly, the example where we've got a US national with a Spanish visa, absolutely something that the Vistra service can accommodate, and I'm sure other ACSP services can also accommodate. The key thing is to look for a service that's not just digital, but has a team of experts sat behind it. So for us, it was really important when we developed our solution that we had experts sat behind our digital solution. So if you can run it all by yourself, absolutely perfect, but you've got the comfort of knowing that if you hit a stumbling block, that you do have someone on the end of the phone that can walk you through the process and help you get through that ID verification. Okay, we've got another question here. So, Suki, I think this is probably going to come in your direction. So how are organizations identifying who their senior managers are for the purposes of the test? And is it consistent with the FCA/PRA, SM and CR framework? So I think this is talking around the failure to prevent fraud definition of senior manager. Suki, you might just want to give some background on those frameworks just for everybody else that's on the call, but it would be great if you could pick that one up.
Sure. So the SM and CR framework is the senior management and certificate regime. So this is the regulatory framework that enhances individual accountability within financial institutions by clearly defining senior management responsibilities, conduct standards, and oversight obligations. So with ECCTA, it broadens the accountability far beyond your regulated role. So a senior manager is considered to be anyone who manages or organizes a substantial part of the business, not only the statutory directors. So the best approach is to map out roles functionally. So P&L owners, key operational heads, and business leads. So you can then compare that to your SM and CR mapping, brief the individuals on their responsibilities, and document oversight evidence. when you maintain a senior manager map, it clearly shows why each role is included and how accountability is evidenced. So this approach future-proofs your organization by embedding personal accountability culture-wide and not just within regulated entities.
Amazing. That's really helpful. And actually, Suki, I'm going to keep you. We've just had another question. Is it possible to go through the first question in a little bit more detail? I may have missed the Companies House email, which covers the audit trail in relation to their challenge. So this links back to the first question you had on the registrar being able to query information and how governance teams should evidence that filings are accurate and validated.
So the first thing I would say is to protection of sensitive addresses and personal information from the public register. So you have your section 243s that you can do that with. You also have your improved IDV verification safeguards. You can look at removing any personal details from the registrar's online public profile, and that includes old resolutions, documents, forms, anything that kind of has personal information on it. Could you repeat the second part of the question? Sorry.
Yeah, of
Expand
course.
it
No,
in.
sorry. So it was just around, you answered a question earlier around the registrar being able to query and reject information under section 29 and how governance
Oh,
teams should
yes.
address that. So yeah, so the question that's come in is just could you give a bit more detail because the person who's posted the question hasn't had or hasn't seen anything from Companies House in terms of that audit trail and what they would need if there is a challenge.
So in terms of what you need if there was a challenge, it would mainly be your you need to have supporting evidence to show your, I'd say, a master file. So the entity master file that I was discussing earlier, so the source of one truth, where you kind of keep all of your pre-filing checklist, all the information attestation signed by responsible managers or directors. So a document pack kind of showing all your approvals, your IDs and addresses. I
Okay.
hope that
And
makes
it's
sense.
so yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that's around this is obviously a new world for us, right? Companies House haven't previously challenged anything. They've just blindly accepted things that are coming in. So is that something that they've brought in as part of ECCTA, that kind of need for an audit trail, or is that coming from somewhere else? Sorry, that's my question.
No, it's
That's not from
coming as
anybody
part
in
of
the room.
ECCTA. No, it's a part of ECCTA. It's kind
Perfect.
of broadened Companies House rather than being kind of an administrative task. It's more of a regulator per se, so they can ask for further details. They can look into the audit trails. They have more, I guess, right to the exposure of the company and the
Mhm.
operational strategy, the strategic side of things. So in order to keep on top of it, I would suggest keeping the tracker in place. Anything that the Companies House might raise or query because it's such a new environment, you kind of want to keep an eye on everything as an all-rounder rather than certain specifics at this point in time.
That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, and the next one that we have in, I think Nicole is probably coming your way. So the question says, we already have risk assessments and annual fraud training for our staff. Presumably that means that I don't need to do anything more to prepare for failure to prevent fraud.
Yeah, so I think we get this question a lot from clients, and I think there's a misconception that, well, we have fraud procedures in place, anti-fraud procedures in place, and we've got training, for example, in place. So we don't allow any employee to start within our organization without undergoing anti-fraud training. And I think that the key distinction is that there's UK guidance which specifically sets out what the reasonable procedures are that organisations need to take. And it's about having an eye to that UK guidance and just cross-checking that you're doing everything that the UK guidance says. So that it's going further than this is a tick box exercise. We've done an assessment in the past, so therefore we're okay. It's about having the UK guidance in front of you and saying, have we got everything that this UK guidance is suggesting? Now, the UK guidance won't necessarily apply in every single detail because it might be proportionate that, for example, not every organisation has every single aspect of the guidance. So you need to analyze it with an aspect of what is your organization already. So, for example, there might be a higher bar if you're a financial institution than there would be, for example, if you are an agency. So it's always about having that proportionate risk assessment, and it needs to be tailor-made each time. But it is really important, as I said, to have the UK guidance in front of you and not just assume that what your current procedures and processes are doing are complying.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Nicole. And presumably, businesses like Vistra, incumbent law firms, etc., will be able to help with kind of risk assessments and health checks in that kind of sense to ensure that those guidance documents are being met and adhered to.
Yeah, I think most law firms already carry out gaps analysis reviews for clients. Vistra Corporate Law also carries out, we call them a health check. It's basically a gaps analysis. We review what your current policies and procedures are already doing. We have a questionnaire that we send you, and that helps you with identifying those gaps. And then a report is produced, which can help show you where you have gaps and where you need to update your policies and procedures.
Amazing, thank you. Suki, I'm coming back to you now. So this is an interesting question actually, and it's taking us a little bit away from what we've been talking about, but still very much ECCTA related. So we are talking about the accounts reform, sorry. So by financial years ending April 2027, small and micro companies will no longer be able to file abridged accounts and will have to publish profit and loss information. How should boards prepare for the cultural shift in financial transparency, especially in private or family-owned groups that have never disclosed P&L data before? It's a great question.
So I'm going to start by saying that this is going to be a genuine culture shift, and particularly for family-owned businesses and private businesses, should I say. So boards should start now by building a cross-functional disclosure program. So finance, legal, and COSEC kind of working together. They should review their accounting policies and plan for employee or competitor sensitivities. So align website and narrative disclosures and engage with lenders, I would say. So you want to kind of check that each entity should have a P&L disclosure plan. It should have a P&L disclosure plan that is approved by the board. So that's including communication lines and key stakeholders. Well, sorry, let me retract that. Each entity should have a P&L disclosure plan approved by the board, including communication lines for key stakeholders. So if it's handled well, the reform can enhance trust and brand credibility, I'd say. But if it was handled poorly, it could kind of raise confusion and fear. So I'd say governance's role in this is to frame the narrative before the numbers go public.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Suki. And actually, I think that sums up for me ECCTA in a nutshell. If it's handled well, this is such a great thing for improving investor confidence, client confidence, general confidence in the UK kind of business environment, right? But if it's handled badly, yeah, it's not going to reflect well. So no, perfect answer. Thank you so much. We've got a couple of IDV questions. I'm going to lump them together, so I'm conscious that time is ticking on. So just a few together. So new directors being appointed in the coming months, can we do that IDV now? Yes, absolutely, 100%. So this also ties into, it's not a question that we've been asked, but it is a question we're being asked by clients, and it's something we're trying to prepare our clients for, links into formations. So IDV, and this concept I think has been lost a little bit in the press, but IDV links to the individual. Whilst companies are being told to get ECCTA ready, and they absolutely should be getting ECCTA ready, identity verification attaches to individuals. So if I am a director at Vistra and I leave tomorrow, I take my IDV with me. It doesn't stay with Vistra. It doesn't move to someone else in Vistra. It's mine. It can come with me to as many companies as I like. If you have new directors coming on board and you're doing your IDV for your existing directors now, and you want to get that IDV done, absolutely. Add them into the process, do all the IDVs together. They can get their personal code as soon as they want to. They do not have to be a director appointed at the point that they ask Companies House for their personal code. Similarly with formations, from the 18th of November, when IDV becomes mandatory, you will not be able to form a company without director personal codes. Obviously, there are lots of providers, Vistra included, who will be able to get your IDV and then do your formation. But if you have a same day need, or if you maybe have a stack of companies, so Topco, Midco, Bidco, an M&A transaction, anything that's kind of time sensitive, and you need that formation to happen on a specific date, you need to be thinking about getting your personal codes and your ID verification for your directors done early. Get it done ahead of time. There is nothing stopping you. They do not have to be appointed. So yeah, absolutely. Really good question. Definitely one that's been missed a little bit in the publicity that's come out from Companies House, but you can apply for a personal code at any time. So if in doubt, get it done early. And then just the other couple of questions I wanted to tie in with this before we move on. Does ID verification have to be renewed? No. There is, of course, always the chance that Companies House will change their mind at some point in the future, but at the moment, it is very much a one and done. That will stay with you as your personal code for your whole life. The only reason that may change is if, for example, it's revoked. So if you were a director and you were struck off, and it was revoked from you for some reason, or Companies House had some reason to suspect that you were not completely above board, they may choose to revoke it, but that's the one kind of very limited exception where you might have to reapply at some point in the future. But no, at the moment, there are no plans for a renewal or a refresher. It's one code that will stay with you for life. And then the final question I just want to pick up in this set on IDV, can I do this for my directors by providing copy documents just as I do for KYC? No, sadly not. So we do need the directors to engage in this process. Part of the ID verification process is a liveness test. So even if you were to go to the post office and do the in-person IDV solution that they offer, you would still have to have that director attend in person. So all you super helpful PAs, EAs, COSECs out there, no, you can't unfortunately take this off of your directors. They will have to engage in the process. We will make it as painless as possible for them, but they do have to engage, I'm afraid. Okay. Sorry, we've got one more IDV question that I'm just going to pick up before we move on, and then I've got one for you, Suki, coming your way. But just before we move back to Suki, what if a director's address changes in terms of updating the ID verification? Okay, this is a great question, and it's a very fluffy answer, but again, it's something that came up at the Companies House stakeholder forum. So straight from Companies House in terms of answers, there will be a form to provide updates. At this point in time, we don't know whether it will be updated via the next confirmation statement or whether it will be updated very similar to the update forms that we have now for a change of address for a director. It may well be a similar form, or it may well be added to that form. Companies House couldn't give us a definitive answer, but there will be a way that we can update directors. They won't have to go through IDV again. They will just be able to update their address. But it didn't seem to be something that was top of Companies House's agenda. So it may well be that we do not see that change form for a little while. But that's what they've told us. There will be a form, there will be a mechanism to report that change into Companies House. It will not be a new IDV. It will be an update in the same way that you would currently update directors' details. Okay, next question. So, oh, this is a great question. We've got a good audience today. So, okay, Suki, this is one for you. So how do you see ECCTA influencing the G in ESG? And could we start to see governance data, quality and transparency becoming measurable in ESG metrics?
Yes, absolutely. I think ECCTA creates a in the short form, ECCTA creates or is creating a generation of governance metrics that are measurable, objective, and comparable. So we'll start to see data such as on-time IDV rates, absence of kind of registrar annotations, and I guess the speed of query resolution forming part of the ESG scorecards. So these kind of become tangible indicators of governance maturity. So they show stakeholders how transparent and well controlled a business truly is. So boards can integrate ECCTA KPIs into ESG dashboards and even link them to executive scorecards, kind of turning compliance into a trust building advantage. I mean, another kind of foreseeable item that I see is that it being ECCTA being a standing item on the agendas for a ESG forum or an ESG committee if there is one in place. So yeah, kind of mindful on building trust, basically.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this is all about trust, right? Much as it's very easy for us all in the governance world to be lost in the fact that this is just a big pain. But actually, you know, it has a really good purpose at its heart. It's very much about trust and transparency and improving the UK economy. So yeah, great answer. Thank you, Suki. Nicole, coming back to you for one, this is quite a broad one, and Suki, you might want to comment on this after Nicole's answered as well. Once I have completed IDV, is there anything else I need to do?
Yeah, thanks, Adana. That is a very broad question. So we've talked about ECCTA today, and a lot of people do think of ECCTA as being IDV, but it is important to remember that ECCTA is also failure to prevent fraud. It's also the change in the identity doctrine. So as Suki was talking about earlier, senior managers are now in scope for implicating the company in fraud. There's also various other updates around anti-money laundering and protection of information. Crypto assets are also in scope. We've talked about the reforms. So there's always lots to do. We have some training modules which you can undertake, and that will give you a really good overview of what is encompassed within ECCTA. And also, as I mentioned, the health check we can have. There's a health check with an eye to failure to prevent fraud, but you can have a health check, for example, if you are worried that with the increased powers with Companies House that they may start challenging information on the public register. We can go through and help you with that and look at the information to see whether it's been filed accurately. So lots to think about when it comes to ECCTA. And it doesn't just stop with IDV.
That's amazing. Thank you, Nicole. Suki, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. We've got time for one more question, and it's going to come to you anyway. So I'll ask the question, and then if you want to incorporate anything in addition to Nicole's answer into this one, please feel free to. Also, any other questions that we have in the chat that we haven't got to, we will come back to you with written answers. So please don't stop asking questions if you've still got more, but we'll just do one more before we close. So the ECCTA's success will ultimately depend on collaboration between Companies House, law enforcement, and the professions. What role do you think governance professionals and corporate service providers like Vistra should play in shaping the next phase of guidance and good practice? That is such a good question.
That is a very good question. So I would start by saying that this is a moment for governance professionals to lead from the front. So we shouldn't just implement ECCTA. We should help shape how it's interpreted and applied in practice. I think that's a really key point for us to kind of highlight. It also means kind of feeding back to Companies House, co-designing practical templates and sharing real world learnings with peers. So I would professionally say that we can define market standards for reasonable procedures and contribute to training and awareness and ensure that boards truly understand their new duties. So I guess in short, what I am trying to say is that we're moving from being compliance reporters to being governance architects. So ECCTA gives our profession a seat at the policy table, and we should use it to restore trust across corporate Britain and try and be an example globally, considering we have such a robust corporate structure in the country anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer. You know, the UK has long been seen as the gold standard for corporate governance, and I think this, as I said, as painful as it may feel right now for us all, this really only serves to kind of really reinforce that standing. It's a good thing that we're doing, and I think you're right, Suki. I think it presents a really great opportunity. That is unfortunately all we have got time for. But I want to say on behalf of myself and my fellow presenters, Nicole and Suki, massive thanks for everyone for engaging. It's been a really, really great session. Please do feel free to reach out to any of us or any other contacts that you may have at Vistra or ECCTA@vistra.com with any questions that you may have or any support that you may need. We are more than happy to help. But thank you again for all joining us, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.